Yeah, we met. I stole the shield.
Today, my good friend.
Invented by writer-editor Stan Lee and writer-artist Steve Ditko, Spider-Man is a superhero who protects the city of New York. He made his debut in the anthology comic book Amazing Fantasy number 15, which was published during the Silver Age of comic books. This is Spider-Man without CGI, what it really looks like behind the scenes of the movie. The Illusion Battle. Midway through Far From Home, there was a battle scene you may remember as the Illusion Battle. The company in charge of CGI had a lot of freedom to complete the scene as they saw fit. They came up with the ideas for illusions at the same time while they were animating and adding effects to the shots. This gave them freedom to provide freedom to the on-set production team. This helped create the scene where MJ was attacked by Mysterio. The company blocked out the animation ahead of time with the CGI MJ. They added precise lighting, taking into account the moon and Eiffel Tower. This information was passed along, which made it easier for the rest of the team to set up the perfect lighting for the shot. In the end, when they slipped MJ into the final product, it looked perfect. Here's some more interesting information. The construction site where the battle took place was 100% CGI generated. The CGI company created the whole building and added Tom Holland's footage on top. To save time on set, they filmed Tom in a mocap suit instead of in costume. If this was done in another way, there would have been dozens of costume changes for only one sequence. The zombie Iron Man used mocap as well. The CGI company looked at various designs to create a character with the right balance of horrifying minus overly gruesome. We think you'll agree the final result was quite good. Holograms. Holograms are used throughout the MCU, which means the different movie teams have to keep the holograms looking the same throughout all the movies, while adding a little variety. In the scene where Mysterio is introduced as Quentin Beck explaining the elemental attacks, the CGI team used a specialized lightbox table. The CGI team had to adjust every hologram Mysterio and Spider-Man was looking at to fit in perfectly to the room with the actors, so that it seemed like the holograms were actually there. The lighting was sometimes completely removed from the set as the team worked with layers. The raw footage does not make the holograms seem real enough. That only happens after the CGI team gets to work on fine-tuning them. Scene setting for Water Elemental. This scene was filmed on set. The buildings from Venice were simply recreations atop a large pool of water. To add in the backgrounds later, there were massive blue screens behind the set. The screen utilized a lot of CGI, but the stunts were performed by Tom and his stunt doubles using a lot of wire rigs. The CGI team had to later remove the wires as Tom jumped from pole to pole and onto a bridge. The CGI team also had to fill in the backgrounds of Venice, and they had to bring the water elemental to life. Because there was no reference for the monster, the actor had stunt doubles and had to really sell their performance. Everybody was drenched with very real and very cold water. London. In London, a lot of CGI was used again. Many of the scenes on Tower Bridge were filmed on location. Other scenes, like the tour bus, were filmed in front of green screens on set pieces. The shots of broken cars and rubble were also set pieces done in front of green screens. Wide shots were done with the CGI building a complete model of Tower Bridge. This model was also used for filming the scenes of the climactic final battle in the movie. The scenes with the drones were all created by the CGI team as well. The drones were constructed virtually out of all their parts. These parts then came together to form the completed drones. Once again, the actors had no reference points to visualize the drones. Netherlands. You may be surprised that the scene filmed in a field of different colored tulips was actually filmed on an empty grass field. The field was actually in the UK and not even in the Netherlands. The jet and all the beautiful flowers on display were CGI. Imagine having to simulate a field of tulips with wind and the jet landing. The CGI team actually simulated over 2 million flowers in the scene. They created 8 colors, and for each color, they created 8 different varieties of tulips. They have a trick though. They utilized a method called pre-caching, where software downloads data ahead of time in anticipation of that data being used later. That meant the computers did not have to simulate 2 million flowers simultaneously. When you take the CGI away, all you see is Tom Holland and Jim Favreau standing on an empty field. A whole CGI Spider-Man. Imageworks did VFX for all the previous Spider-Man movies. The producers of the latest Spider-Man were actually reluctant to go back to Imageworks since they wanted a breath of fresh air for the new look. Imageworks laid their fears to rest with test footage that was exactly what they needed for the movie. They exactly whipped up a complete CGI Spider-Man to show the producers. Apparently, the CGI model worked and moved so well that it even fooled Tom Holland. They focused on making the MCU MCU Spider-Man the most realistic one ever. They did this by studying everything about how Tom Holland moved and incorporated them into the CGI Spider-Man. Moments of hesitation and physical imbalance made the CGI Spider-Man appear super real. It looks even better than any of the previous Spider-Man movies. What still needs to be done is to remove wrinkles from Tom or the CGI Spider-Man suits, or make them look like they've been through wear and tear. The suits. Spider-Man builds his own suit in the back of the Tony Stark jet. The shots of Tom entering the jet were CGI, but the inside of the jet was a whole new set. The holograms were added later with VFX. The CGI team had to replicate an exact replica of the set to layer the holograms across. In this way, they could add not only holograms, but moving machinery to bring it all to life. While the suit was being constructed, the team had to decide which layers of the suit the fans could see to create the finished product. This created the idea of a very strong suit as the layers were added. For the final battle scene in London, ImageWorks used the layered suit built to show as Spider-Man's suit was being battered. When he has an emotional reunion with MJ, one can see white patches where the suit sustained damage. Homecoming visual effects. The director of Homecoming, John Watts, filmed Holland and Michael Keaton, who plays the nefarious Vulture, on sets and against green screen in order to create each action-packed sequence. In order to create a finished image, these plates, shots of actual actors and stunt performers on real sets, were composited together or utilized as reference by Bialik and his visual effects team to create their computer-generated characters. More than 100 of the approximately 300 shots Bialik's team made for the film's finale included a totally computer-generated Spider-Man. There are certain pictures that were originally plates, but they were later converted to all CG since they wanted to do an action that was distinct from what they had photographed. But in general, we encourage our clients to use plates whenever possible, just because when you have a lot of all CGI images next to each other, it's more difficult to pull it off while still keeping the audience anchored and not drawn away from the story. It's always helpful to have some real-world pictures in there to bookend the CG or to intersperse amongst the CG to keep us grounded. There were occasions when we were shooting a plate shot and they didn't like how the ears came out of the mask, so we'd swap the head or just do the shot entirely in computer-generated imagery. A lot of the time when they looked at something they animated, it didn't feel quite right, and it was difficult to pin down exactly why, because he was doing what he should have been doing. Later, after looking at the reference, you see that his knee bangs down and strikes his other knee, causing it to buckle in on itself while he's bearing his weight or when he takes a step back. It's not something you think about doing all the time. Just paying attention to his body language, the way he would relax his shoulders while he was talking, or the way he might try to use his hands to express himself a little bit, picking up on those tiny cues. Spider-Man is CGI heavy. Once you've removed all the elements of what CGI does to Spider-Man and other MCU movies, you'll have one of the most uninteresting things ever to watch. CGI has truly changed the cinematic world. What do you think about CGI used in Spider-Man movies in the past and lately? Which movie is your favorite?